What is it that makes a person a Christian? Okay, that's a bit of a loaded question, right? There's a lot of things that you can say makes a person a Christian, but it's a really important question to ask. See, in the beginning, the thing that made a person a Christian was simply that they followed Jesus. That was really all there was to it. The early disciples didn't have any kind of creed that they would use. They didn't have any rituals that they would go for. Jesus just said, "Follow me," and they did. And that's what made them followers of Jesus. The term Christian hadn't been used at this point, so it's not really fair to call them Christians yet. A little bit later, when they were starting to call people Christians, Paul kind of narrowed down what makes a person a Christian by saying this. In Romans 10, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So that's kind of it for the first little while after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, that's what makes you a Christian. And it continued simply like that for a while for a really pretty obvious reason. It's hard to figure out exactly what you believe when you're getting killed for believing it. When Roman persecution was going on, it was hard for Christians to gather in any significant place because it'd be a great bonus for the Romans that way. So it continued in this kind of simple pattern that Jesus is Lord, which of course was the reason for the persecutions, because if Jesus was Lord, Caesar was not, and the Romans would have a problem with that. Now, all of this changed in 313, when Emperor Constantine, who had become a Christian, issued the Edict of Milan, which made Christianity a protected religion, and of course, since the emperor was part of that religion, a popular one too. When the systematic persecution ended, the Christian leadership had a chance to gather together and decide just what it means to be a Christian. And the result of that is what we now call the Nicene Creed. That creed came out of the Council of Nicaea, well, two councils of Nicaea and another council. It's complicated. But all in all, we get the Nicene Creed, which was set up as these are the things that a Christian believes. It sets up things like a belief in the Trinity, the idea that Jesus is both human and God. And of course, just like in Paul's very simple version, it explains that the resurrection of Jesus is kind of important. And by kind of, I mean a lot. Now, as time went on, more and more little distinctions would spring up. More and more things would get added to the list of what makes a person a Christian and what makes them a heretic or a pagan or, unfortunately, in the general thinking of the time, someone that needed to be gotten rid of. When the Reformation happened, this whole process exploded with the Lutherans in Germany, the Calvinists in Switzerland, the Anglicans in England, the Anabaptists wherever they could hide from everyone else, the Orthodox, which had developed into its own thing after the Western Roman Empire more or less stopped existing. You got a lot of different groups that had a lot of different beliefs, and many of them agreed. Many of these groups continued to stick with kind of the area around the Nicene Creed, but what was important to an Anglican wasn't what was important to a Lutheran, wasn't what was important to a Catholic, wasn't what was important to the Orthodox, and it got to be an issue. It especially got to be an issue because Not only did they have lists of what made a person a Christian, but they had lists of what made a person not a Christian, and one could argue that the 100 Years' War was solely the result of religion. This kind of thing never really went away. We still have all kinds of different groups that define what Christian orthodoxy is. What is it that is the right thing for a Christian to believe or not believe? These things range from stuff that we would consider a core belief to things that we would consider insignificant, but someone else would consider a core belief. Because we can't even agree on what's important and what isn't, you can see why problems arise. And it's especially frustrating for me because our gospel lesson today told us exactly what it means to be a Christian. It gave us about as clear as possible what exactly it looks like to be a Christian. Because Jesus gets asked a question. Out of all the commandments, what is most important? To phrase it another way, the man is asking, what is the core of following God? What is the most important thing when it comes to following God? And Jesus says, well, the most important commandment is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your mind and with all your soul and with all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Done. So what does it mean to be a Christian? What is the core of following God? Our theology doesn't need to be complicated. It's to love God and love our neighbor. Everything else comes second to that. Now, it's cute that Mark illustrates this concept in the next two scenes. See, first you have Jesus talking about the teachers of the law. Now, whenever this passage comes up, it always makes me a little nervous because it talks about people wearing long, flowing robes. You can see why it makes me a little nervous. It also talks about people taking the most important seats at church. Now, luckily, if there's one thing I don't like, it's being greeted at Smith's. Because usually I have something in my cart that I'm a little embarrassed of. Typically because I can't cook. So there's usually a lot of frozen things in my cart, and quite often there's some adult beverages in my cart, and it's just always a little awkward when you come across the pastor buying frozen pizzas and beer. But know that if you should happen to meet me at Smith's, that is probably what you will see in my cart. Unless it's the, oh, I forgot this trip, or the, oh, I forgot this when I forgot this trip. Because it's every time you go to the grocery store. It's frustrating. But this passage also talks about these same people devouring widows' houses. See, this is an example, the people that Jesus is talking about are folk who can check all of the right boxes off. If they pulled out a list of these are the things that it means to follow God, they can check off everything on the list because they know the list really well. But they're missing the most important part. They aren't showing love to God or their neighbor. Then, of course, the next scene is of a poor widow coming to the temple and putting in 2 small coins. She has nothing, and yet she gave it all to God. Her love of God showed in the things that she was doing, and so did her love of others, as the whole point of the temple tax was supposed to help everybody out. Didn't actually work like that, but it was supposed to. And Jesus says, depending on which translation you read, she either gave all that she had, or sometimes, and I love it when it's translated this way, she gave her whole life. The teachers of the law that Jesus was talking about, they had all the right beliefs. They would fit everyone's list, but they didn't have love. And that's what being a Christian means. On Monday, Thursday, in a couple weeks, we'll hear about Jesus' new commandment to his disciples that really isn't a new commandment at all. Because Jesus tells his disciples to love one another as he loved them. That's not a new commandment. It's the very same commandment that he's talking about today. And the absolute core of our Christian life, when we get rid of the things that make us Lutheran, when we get rid of the creeds, when we get down to what is the bare essentials, it is to love. To love God with everything that we are. And to love our neighbors like we love ourselves. If we do that, then we are following Jesus. I can have perfect theology. I can mean everything I say in the creeds. I can preach a perfect sermon every week. But if I don't love God and others, what's the point? Because when it comes to being a Christian, it's not about those things. It's about living a life full of love. Love for God and love for those around us. So what makes a person a Christian? Quite simply, it is love.